We're now just 6 days away from the Iowa caucuses, and one candidate ramping up his efforts in that state today is Senator Bernie Sanders. This as polls suggest Sanders is closing in on another leading contender, former Vice President Joe Biden. NBC News political reporter Shaq Brewster joins me now. And Shaq, what's on the senator's agenda today? We saw the proceedings on Capitol Hill break up. I gather the senator might be evaluating sort of his plans going forward, the itinerary going forward as we approach the caucuses.
That's right. He started his day in Washington, D.C., and you've heard him over the past couple of weeks say he will try to get back to Iowa as much as he can. As of now, we do not believe he's coming to Iowa tonight. We know, for example, Senator Amy Klobuchar will be on a plane and having an event in Council Bluffs at 8 p.m. later today. Elizabeth Warren will be having a teletown hall. She'll also be staying in Washington, D.C. But for Senator Sanders, it's not clear exactly what he will be doing. But I'll tell you, I just got off the phone with an advisor from the campaign, and they fully plan to tout the fact that they have their surrogates here. So Kendrick Sampson, an actor, will be out having an event, gathering supporters, getting them to knock on doors. You'll have Jane Sanders here later tomorrow, and also Michael Moore and the co-chairs of Ben & Jerry's. They're making their rounds all day and all week long here in Iowa. So the campaign's saying they're still going, they're still knocking on doors, still making those calls. The operation is still moving despite the senator still being in Washington, D.C., stuck on that Senate floor for the impeachment trial. David?
Shaq, when you look at the tabs in the polling, be that the Des Moines Register poll or anything else, you see that he enjoys a lot of support. Senator Sanders enjoys a lot of support from young Iowans. And I guess notoriously they're a hard group to make sure you get out on caucus night. So this is going to be hugely important for the senator from Vermont to do. What's the campaign saying about how they're going to reach those younger voters, how they're going to convey to them that they need to come out on that cold night?
Well, that's right. Young voters are key, and it's a key element to Senator Sanders' coalition. That New York Times poll that got a lot of attention over the weekend, it showed that about 40% for voters 30 and under, Sanders won about 40% of those voters. That's much more than any of the other candidates in this race. That's a consistent pattern that you're seeing among Sanders supporters and among the polls. And then if you go to his events, you see many of the people there are young, youthful supporters. So his campaign has been targeting these college campuses, for example, very aggressively. We know that they have caucus drives and get out the vote efforts going on these campuses regularly. They see these young voters as a core group to their support. Senator Sanders, he was in Sioux City yesterday, and he had a big rally right before he left. I'm going to let that truck go by, so I'm not yelling at you. But he had a big rally in Sioux City. It was Sunday night, actually, and he made a point to say he believes he will win the Iowa caucuses because of the fact that he will have a historic voter turnout. They're really counting on young voters, and part of that is getting them out in the polls. I don't know if you can see it now, but it's starting to snow a little bit, some precipitation coming down. If this happens on caucus day, that's another barrier that people will have to get to the caucus sites on Monday.
Absolutely. You mentioned that New York Times poll, mentioned these recent polls showing Senator Sanders leading that group of Democratic candidates. How good is the polling? I mean, this is not polling for a primary election when people, in a traditional sense, go to vote in the ballot box. This is another thing entirely. So when you look at the whole calculus here of what's going to happen on caucus night, what do polls tell us? How good are they historically?
You know, they're hard. You know, they are an indicator. Polls are a snapshot of what the mood is right now. And the mood is right now, if you look at the polls and the pattern that you see there, especially if you look at the average of polls, you see that Senator Sanders is ahead of the pack of the rest of this field. However, it's still a caucus. And the thing about caucuses, it's unlike when you go to a regular voting booth in much of the country. You go in the booth, you close the curtains behind you, and you make your selection, walk out and call it a day. A caucus site, you go in, you're going to stand with your candidate, stand with the group of candidates or the group of supporters for your candidate. And if your candidate doesn't reach 15%, then you have to go over to another candidate, and there's negotiations going on. It's an entire process. And last night they had a mock caucus on the campus of Drake University, and despite the polling that we've been seeing, both Senator Sanders and Vice President Biden, they weren't qualifying. They didn't reach that 15% threshold. So some of the Sanders supporters had to go over to other candidates, and some of them actually walked out of the caucus site. I mentioned all that to say the caucuses are very unpredictable. Despite the polling that shows Senator ahead, you have to know that there are many other variables. He's not in the state. You're going to have other candidates here. There are many other variables at play. There's 6 days, and those are 6 long days that can make a true difference before we get to the caucuses.
As the snow falls in Des Moines, Shaq Brewster. Shaq, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here. And click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.